percent overall from the field, but he was also 50% from threes. He's 5 of 10.
I know you're out there. It's okay. Stand back there.
No, more than likely you're gonna get that number 1 seed, and so I want Houston to be ranked at number 1 to 8.
Welcome into another episode of Let's Rage Coogs, presented by the Saxenian Family, and we are coming off a very fire-worthy game between the number 5 ranked Houston Cougars and the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Obviously, the Cougars coming off a loss on the road to the Kansas Jayhawks. We're looking to bounce back this Tuesday night inside the Fertitta Center, and boy, did they did that and more. Tempers flared, but let's start with the kind of the big event that kind of stole the headlines in that second half. Kelvin Sampson ejected around the 50-minute mark. Now, granted, the Cougars were already up 17 points when he got ejected. Houston wasn't necessarily in danger of losing the game, but it did still ignite and provided a spark for the Houston Cougars. They went on an 8-0 run. They made that 18-point lead expand, and boy, Kelvin Sampson was furious. Obviously, we've both been around the program. We've both been following the program for years. I think, at least from my perspective, that's one of the angriest I've seen Kelvin Sampson in a while. And he was very clearly frustrated with the no call on Oklahoma State's big man shoving off Jamal Shead. And then the ESPN2 broadcast showed the play before. Javier Francis had kind of been undercut, another no call. So it kind of built up, and Kelvin Sampson exploded.
Yeah, it seems like they showed a sequence of plays that had him frustrated. And, I mean, that was, I'm sure, well thought out. I'm sure because it seemed well calculated, and it was masterful by him. So it shows a few things to his team. It's going to show, I got your back. And obviously calls something I'm sure they've been talking to officials about, seeing on film. And then in the heat of the moment, then something happened to his best player. And it's fiery as he came all the way down court where the play happened and let him know, look, that was a foul. And so, I mean, that shows your team, I got your back. That same intensity that he talks about, I'm sure they see it in practice all the time. And so to actually see it in the game, and then it ignite the team and the crowd. I mean, it was I want to say it was beautiful to see. I mean, it really was. I mean, and then just after that, I mean, from seemed like not a dead crowd, but just a couple steady crowd. I mean, the game was.
It was a game.
Yeah,
yes, I think they were kind of slumber.
And so
it was Oklahoma State. There's not necessarily that big feel to it. It was a team that was entering this matchup 2-7. It was honestly just another home game for Houston. And then when that happened, it completely changed the entire atmosphere. I mean, Fertitta Center exploded. It went from just honestly from the fans kind of going through the motions of the game to like, hey, they all rallied around their coach, Kelvin Sampson, and the players on the court rallied. The fans rallied. I mean, the referees heard it for those 5 minutes after Kelvin Sampson got ejected. They were just on the refs, chanting referees, anti-referee chants, different things pointed at the officials. Every call ignited a reaction. Like we mentioned, the on-the-court product for the Houston Cougars was big time as well.
Yeah, it was, man. It was big time. I mean, that's why, I mean, just watching it, I just knew what it was going to do to the team, but just the message that it sends, I mean, to your team, the leadership, the tough, everything that they preach, it exemplified him that in that moment, the heat of the moment, sticking up for his players, his team, and letting the official know, like, man, I don't care what the score is or what's going on. I'm not going to allow you guys to not ref the game and call obvious fouls that can get my guys hurt. And so, I mean, it was a beautiful job from him, but to the game itself, I mean, Houston, Oklahoma State, they came to play. I mean, to start the game, they defended well and was making a couple shots that kind of kept it close, but it was only a matter of time before Houston started to make consecutive shots and got consecutive stops and kind of pulled away. It was good to see Jamal Shead to get back on track.
Yeah, big time. Jamal Shed had 17 points at halftime, finished the game with 23 points, 4 assists. We both know Jamal Shed most definitely could not have been happier or satisfied with the performance that he had on Saturday up in Lawrence, Kansas. And he had a great bounce back game. He looked very locked in, like you mentioned. He was the phrase that was mentioned over the course of the ESPN2 broadcast, which was, again, he's the head of the snake. He's the leader of this Houston Cougars team, and he came out and played like he had a point to prove again, especially after a performance where he only had 7 points against Kansas, didn't necessarily shoot particularly well, obviously missed that big layup when Houston kind of had a chance to make a rally in that game. Complete turnaround. And from that standpoint, he kind of really was the leader in this game from that standpoint. And the Cougars never really looked back. To your point, Dan, like you mentioned, uh, Oklahoma State played good defense early, but then Houston turned it up and they held them scoreless they held them without a field goal for almost over 8 minutes in the middle of that first half. And from that point, the game was pretty much well in hand for Houston.
It was. And on the defensive end, um, Chris went out and said that he predicted that Oklahoma State wouldn't score 70. They got close to it down the stretch, but they didn't score 70. And you just see the defensive intensity, especially early on. I think it was like 2 or 3 consecutive trips down the floor where they struggled to get a shot off. We got shot clock violation, and one of the times maybe they got it off right before the shot clock expired. And so the defense was there, but just offensively, like I said, that was what I was going to be looking for going into this game. Jamal Shed, when he is aggressive but taking shot selection inside the paint and making his mid-range, that only, I think, builds his confidence and his rhythm to be able to knock down his three-point shot. And he pretty much had it going. And then Emmanuel, I mean, he's been steady all year, whether his jumpers fall or not. So that really just shows me he's a true scorer. He knows how to score the basketball, and he was able to knock it down some jumpers tonight. And he was his usual self in regards to getting to the free throw line and just being an all-around scorer. He finished with 16. And so offensively, it was good to see Houston in the guards. But like Coach Sampson said during the week, Houston is yet to have a game where all of their scores are making shots at the same time. So I'm kind of waiting for that game to happen. And the bench players, though, they contributed as well.
Big time with the win. Houston improves to 20-3 on the season. They're 7-3 in Big 12 play. Absolutely. Emmanuel Sharp got back to really just being able to knock down in rhythm shots and kind of came during that spurt after Kelvin Sampson had got ejected. I don't know if it was just a matter of Houston playing more loosely or playing a little bit fired up, but Emmanuel Sharp showed up, especially in that second half. He had a flurry. The one player that had a tremendous game tonight against Oklahoma State, Malik Wilson. I mean, he kind of had a little bit of a coming out party for Houston. He was very active, aggressive on defense. He's getting a lot of steals. He got a lot of coast-to-coast layup baskets in this matchup against the Cowboys.
He did, and he looked assertive and looked confident in his shot and getting to his mid range and using his athleticism kind of to turn and fade over the defense. We saw him make a couple of turnaround jump shots, and even he was driving and looking to get to the basket. And so I think him to get more confident and more comfortable, along with Damian. I think I asked Coach Sampson his media availability during the week. About how he said a couple weeks ago that was on him to get Damian going. And he kind of reiterated the same thing. He's like, yeah, that's on me to kind of get him going and figure out how to get him comfortable in this road and get him to where he can be playing well. And so he was able to make a couple shots tonight and get the ball in the hole a little bit and get to the free throw line. And so if him and Malik can be consistent contributors off the bench, I think this Houston offensive team could be even more potent because on any given night, you know Emmanuel is going to get you that 12, and then Jamal can go for 20 plus, and LJ can go for 20 plus. Now I'm just looking for a game where both of those guys, LJ and Jamal, both have it going, and Emmanuel just can be that complementary role player that he's been throughout the entire year.
Most definitely, big time. I'm looking at the comments. I'm working on getting whether this would be a quad 3 win for the Houston Cougars, obviously a home game for Houston. Looking at the net rankings, Oklahoma State coming into today was ranked 139th in the net, so I believe it would be a quad 3 win for Houston, but I'm gonna double check in a moment. Rex 32 on YouTube comments hashtag free Sampson. He also brings up this, which we saw a little bit of some unusual playing time just in terms of when it happened. But Cedric Lott got in the game early in the first half, or he got in the game in the first half, which hasn't happened all season long. A lot of foul trouble for Houston's big man in this matchup. Again, we kind of mentioned it on Saturday, but in the few minutes that he had, picked up a quick foul. Again, his inexperience kind of shows in terms of when he was guarding, was late to go vertical, and they called the foul for him. But he did get a strong offensive rebound. He looked like a Houston Cougar in that aspect. Anything you'd like to comment with the very, very minimal Cedric Lott minutes in that first half?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised. I mean, it was something that you said we mentioned last week, and in the last 2 minutes of the first half, Coach Sampson put him in, and I kind of expected it going against a young team. I could see that would be a game to get him a good 2 or 3 minutes on the floor against a competitive basketball, and so to see him on the floor, big body. I mean, you can tell a little bit. Well, not really. I mean, he looked confident out there. I think just the more the game plays, the more experience he get, we'll see him to be even more confident. But when he caught it in the post, he looked, threw it back out, and I mean, he looked like he know what he's doing out there. So as he continues to learn, continues to develop, I'm sure we'll see more of him in years to come. But I wasn't surprised about him getting on the floor tonight. I think this was the game for him to do that early. Coach Sampson went to him.
Yeah, big time. I think the biggest thing with Cedric Lott is just a matter of getting experience. And again, going back to the ESPN2 broadcast, they alluded to how Kelvin Sampson had told them leading up to this game that, and we've heard this in the past with a lot of the players in Houston, they kind of track their progress or their plans by semester. They, on the ESPN2 broadcast, they mentioned how for Cedric Lott, plan is for him to be a fifth semester player when they start really having, or from the outside, we start seeing the impact that he has for the Houston Cougars. Obviously, of course, this is the third semester for Cedric Lott, and he's still got a long way to go, but it looks like Houston has a strong plan for him. Before we get into some of the other comments, I'd like to remind everybody, thank each and every single one of you guys that's taking the time out of this Tuesday night here following Houston's 79-63 win over Oklahoma State to watch Let's Rage Coogs presented by the Saxenian Family. Let's Rage Coogs is the original Houston post-game show for each and every single football and men's basketball post-game show. Obviously, of course, we want to thank Steve Saxenian, the primary sponsor of today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs. The Saxenian Family is not only the primary sponsor of today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs, but for each and every single men's basketball regular season episode. And we're kind of entering the home stretch when it comes to Big 12 play. Of course, we also like to say thank you to Star Pizza for being today's secondary sponsor on this episode of LRC. With 3 locations across the Houston area, Star Pizza is your go-to spot before or after the game. Be sure to stop by on Tuesday for an all-you-can-eat. Star Pizza has had free delivery since 1976. Curious to get your thoughts on this comment down. I kind of got distracted by Rex 32 brought up 6 p.m. too early of a tip-off, but the crowd did fill in. A little bit different for a home game, 6 p.m. tip-off for the most part. I think they were fine as is, like we mentioned, especially after Kelvin Sampson got tossed. The energy went through the roof.
Now, I actually noticed that early in that first half, you could see a lot of empty seats. I think that's a good catch because I actually caught that. And with Houston, with the 6 p.m. traffic, but within that, it made me to think about something we brought up before. They need to expand the student section. I think we behind either one of the baskets, both of the baskets, to allow more students in, especially on games like this where maybe you aren't expecting a sellout, or maybe if it was a sellout, I don't really know. But I mean, towards the end, you could see it was filled in and the crowd was full. But in that first half, you could definitely see a lot of empty seats. I don't know whether it's from the traffic, early start, people getting off work, traveling to the see the game, or whatever the case may be.
You, Dan, getting opportunity to go to Allen Fieldhouse and see how really the layout of that arena was. Is there anything that stood out to you that potentially you could see be translated or could be imitated at the Fertitta Center, or something that Houston could potentially do down the line that you might have stood out to you?
I think as Houston, well, in regards to design, I think as Houston continues to build more history, they'll add more history to some of the hallways in the building, in which they kind of have that in some of the hallways now. But in regards to like some of the seating, like I said, I think expand the student section, because they have both student sections are behind both of the baskets, and that's where you see a lot of the heckling, what they do with kids with the free throws, and they don't necessarily have that on the floor like Houston has, but all of the other uh, seats are kind of on top of the floor, and so it's really not a bad seat. And so, if anything for Houston, I think could just not only either expand the seats for students to allow to have more of a home atmosphere, especially when you play Kansas. And we heard the announcers mention how loud it was. For me to actually being there, I was wondering how can Houston duplicate that sound, and because Houston's fans are, I mean, I don't want to say they're not sports fans, but they're not college fans. I mean, they're working people who's probably traveling back, or alumni coming back to see the game. But it's a lot of this how it is at Kansas too, though. A lot of people I was sitting around were older people. I mean, they're huge Kansas fans, and they were screaming throughout the entire game. And so, I don't know.
Think about Houston, and this is Houston in general, not just Houston Cougar fans, but when it comes to the big games, they do a good job showing up for those. When it comes to like today, again, perfect example, middle of the week, Oklahoma State. It was an earlier tip off, so most definitely it was a little lacking at the beginning, and that just comes with the city traffic. I'm sure 5 p.m. trying to leave wherever you may be working, and a lot of people aren't necessarily working in downtown, which is right across the street. They have to go back, head back to the Fertitta Center. It's a lot of traffic, a lot of different things. Rex 32 did ask Dayon, how was it getting in and out of Allen Fieldhouse, the traffic, the parking, the concessions?
Traffic getting out was hectic, 1000%. Going in, it was pretty. It was nothing. The concessions was nothing. I mean, was typical. I mean, they pretty much didn't really have much outside of water and chips. Maybe they had nachos and stuff, but I think it's. I didn't taste it, so I can't really comment. I just only on what I saw. But the parking and the getting out was definitely hectic. But I think that's with anywhere when you got a lot of people, that amount of people, that amount of cars getting out. But parking was pretty good there as well.
Paulo Loxia said somebody reposted a tweet from a UH fan at the game who said it took him an hour to drive the last not for 9 miles to Fertitta Center. Traffic must have been bad. I saw that tweet on X.com. So yeah,
Houston
9 miles
right
an
there.
hour. That most definitely was a big obstacle. Big Jack 5102. I can speak from personal experience as well. Yes, 45 South is a nightmare at 5 p.m. in the city of Houston. So,
Especially in that area near the Cullen exit.
oh yeah, big time.
Especially near
When it
that
comes
exit.
to anytime there's intersections, if you're coming from the north side of town heading 45 south, obviously, where 59 merge, 288 merge, even I-10, all those different spots where multiple highways, freeways merge, it's a pain, it's a nightmare. So yeah, 6 p.m. tips, not the best in the world, but it is what it is. Transitioning back into the game itself, speaking of big man, Jawan Roberts was in foul trouble basically all the entire night. Ended up falling out in this game. Didn't necessarily have a offensive highlight reel when it comes to only finishing with four points. He did have, like I mentioned, 5 fouls, fouled out. He still had a couple nice moves, missed a couple of layups. Javier Francis finished with 8 points, 6 rebounds. Jawan Roberts didn't have a single rebound in this game. Like we said, we got some run for Cedric Lott. What did you see from Javier Francis and Jawan Roberts in this game, Dale?
Well, wow. As you said, Jay didn't have a rebound. I just went and looked, and I didn't. That didn't really stick out to me watching the game, because he was definitely active, still his normal self. But with fouls, he really was kind of playing cautious, and I don't want to say playing cautious, but definitely thinking about how the referees were calling the game. But I think they were both active, especially Jay got what one put back dunk off a good pass, and one of them he got a deflection finish under the hoop. But for Javier, it was good to see him healthy. I think his length, his activity, his athleticism continues to stick out when you watch him play. And I think it was good to see him back on the floor. He was aggressive on the post. Him and JoJo. And that's one of the things that I talked about last game when JoJo catching it off the pick and roll in that little mid-range area. Be aggressive to score, whether he makes it or not. And as soon as he caught it, he shot two floaters, missed one of them, or maybe he missed both of them. And I think he did score one of them, but just all three of them, the post players, when they catching it, looking to score, I think that's only for the betterment of Houston when they have that one-on-one matchup.
One of the things with Javier Francis in this game, he had a good move, and I can't remember if it was early in the second half or might have been towards the end of the first half. But again, just talking about how he's grown from a basketball player, as a basketball player, just his comfort level with his post move. He had multiple in this game where dribble, backing up, spin one way, turn around, had a good hook shot, just didn't make the layup. But again, that's something where it's smooth. He getting the move. He was able to get the shot than he wanted against albeit it was a young Oklahoma State team, top to bottom, especially in the front court, but they're very talented as well. So it's good to see Javier Francis being able to make some moves and again getting point blank layups. Those are shots that Houston's gonna take any day of the week.
Definitely, and looking to score. And then on the pick and roll, I think he can be even a bigger threat, especially on the dive. And when Jamal has it going, and teams are going to look to keep him out of the paint, look to stop him from getting inside the basket. You know, he's a more than willing passer. He can throw some of those lobs up to Javier, and he can be able to finish as well. And so it's good to see him continue to develop.
Big time. Speaking of lobs, he had the really good catch
Hmm.
lob, which was set off kind of like it was an action. He set a pick and then backdoor pick, perfect pass, and he caught the lob, which again, he got to showcase his athleticism in this game against Oklahoma State. Real quickly to piggyback what we were talking about a few moments ago, Raun HD says Houston fans will show out for the important and big games. For games like this, the fans show up, but they do not put in the effort unless the Cougs need it / other team as a threat. Couldn't have said it better in terms of what Raul just put there. Said, like Alabama in football, Houston fans are spoiled, but it's also standard here at U of H, the level of play and demand. That's a great point. When the Cougars need it, when there's a situation when they need it, I feel like the fans show out. I guess it was showcased in this game after Kelvin Sampson was ejected, which on that topic, obviously, post game availability. Now, I'm gonna read a quote from Starnes Leland on X.com, who covers the University of Houston for the Daily Cougar and obviously, of course, for GoCougs.com. This is a quote from Kelvin Sampson, who, according to Starnes, Sampson refused to talk about the ejection, and the quote he put is, "It's a $25,000 fine if I tell the truth. So don't ask me. I learned that from Mac Rhodes." End quote. So clearly, Kelvin Sampson's still very frustrated. He feels like there were something that's really um, feels like was done wrong, or there's a bone to pick with the officials there that Kelvin Sampson's gonna hold his tongue to avoid that $25,000 fine. But that's something to keep in the back. When Chris joins us in a moment, we'll for sure ask him more about Kelvin Sampson's comments post game, and honestly, potentially if he could even suffer more consequences from this game. He did leave the coach's box and literally went to the other side of the court. And yelled at the officials. So maybe potentially that could lead to even more consequences, whether it be a one game suspension. This Saturday at Cincinnati, we shall see. Big Jack 512 says Mac got fined $25,000 in the aftermath of Scott True getting tossed the other night. So it seems like there's a lot of conflict going on with the Big 12 and its officials. Sticking back with the game, Damian Dunn was another player where in the first half, I kind of he seemed to be lost in just the plethora of players that were on the court. But I feel like in the second half, he kind of had a stretch there where obviously he hit a couple of shots, and it happened during that same moment when Houston was kind of running on a spark following the ejection. But what stood out to me about Damian Dunn in this game, again, it was brought up on the ESPN2 broadcast, but they blatantly, flat out said that Dunn, one of the players that has kind of incurred the wrath from Kelvin Sampson, specifically due to the effort, which, again, going back to what we talked about Saturday, and we just mentioned the really lack of minutes that he had in that game against Kansas. Maybe that could be one potential explanation as to why he didn't necessarily get that many minutes against Kansas today. Increased amount of minutes, played 19 minutes, had 8 points, 3 of 6, went 1 for 2 from the free throw line. What did you see from Dunn, and what do you think of those comments that were brought up on the ESPN broadcast?
I don't really take too much into those comments. I think it's probably just part of Coach Sampson being Sampson and sticking to the expectation and the standard that he sticks to for his players, and he's not going to change that for anyone. So I take that as just much as be about that. But because on the same token, he took the onus of having to get Damian comfortable and getting him playing better, and how that would be to the betterment of the team. And so I think that's more of his focus and their focus to figure that out as a team. And so it was good to see him make some shots. In my opinion, he just needs time on the floor because honestly, he's probably the best overall scorer on the team, Jamal included. In my opinion, all around game, he's probably the overall best scorer on the team. And so he just needs more time on the floor.
And he definitely has that ability to be able to, even when he's not scoring from just baskets, being able to draw contacts and get to the free throw line, which is an underrated skill set that, like you said, it's a skill not every player necessarily has. And he's most definitely, I agree with you, certainly the best player at being able to just put the ball in the basket. Chris Gardner is going to join us in a few seconds, but before he does, I'd like to remind everybody that this is Let's Rage Coogs, presented by the Saxenian Family. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, Let's Rage Coogs is the original Houston men's basketball and football post-game show. We stream live after each and every single U of H men's basketball and football post-game show. We'd like to say thank you to Steve Saxenian for being the primary sponsor of today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs. Steve Saxenian has been the primary sponsor not only of this episode, but for each and every single episode of the Let's Rage Coogs men's basketball post-game show, and will continue to do so through the remainder of the regular season. Of course, we also like to say thank you to Star Pizza for being today's secondary sponsor on this show. Star Pizza, with multiple locations across the Houston area, Star Pizza is your go-to stop before or after the game. Be sure to stop by any of their locations every Tuesday during lunchtime for an all-you-can-eat pizza buffet. Star Pizza, as always, has free delivery since 1976. And speaking from personal experience, the location at 77 Harvard Street, very convenient in the middle of kind of the Midtown area. They have a good parking lot, which is not always a common thing when it comes to restaurants in that area. So they have a pretty big parking lot, and of course the actual restaurant location is kind of very spacey, and it's a good place to just go hang out, have some pizza after the game. And on that note, we welcome in Chris Gardner of the Houston Roundball Review, who is live from the Fertitta Center and was there when tensions rose and Kelvin Sampson was ejected, and obviously, of course, everything else that happened between the University of Houston Cougars men's basketball team and the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Chris, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, fellas. How are y'all? And it's ironic. I'm reading this comment from Big Jack about Mac Rhodes down 25,000. Coach Sampson kind of referenced that. He said he learned from Mac. Coach Sampson was not going to spend $25,000 for a fine. All right. He was asked a question on what happened, and basically his initial response was to the person asking the question, will you help me pay the $25,000 if I speak on what happened? Answer was no. Don't say anything more about it. So Coach did not speak on what happened. He said, y'all saw it. Y'all saw. So he did not get into any specifics, any details on the 2 technicals he received. And then he even had a little bit, I think he was being serious, but not serious. He said he spent time in the back with his grandkids. So he wasn't really watching the game too much. He knows, Malik and other guys did well, but he did not spend a whole lot of time watching the game once he got tossed.
Well, I want to bring up this comment from Johnny Casanova 713 on YouTube. He said Francis was undercut twice and was injured in the second half, and no call in which Francis got injured and missed the rest of the game. So I'm assuming he's referencing the Kansas game. Similar situation happened in this game against Oklahoma State, where obviously the final match that lit everything was the push off from the Oklahoma State big man on Jamal Shed. Was a no call. I favored obviously the Cowboys, and that is ultimately the final straw that broke the camel's back when it came to Kelvin Sampson's frustration. But on the broadcast, they did show literally the possession right before that on the other end, where it looked like Javier Francis had once again kind of been undercut. Kelvin Sampson pointed it out as the referees were running back. It happened again, where again they pushed Jamal Shed off, no call, and that was it went from there. He got ejected, and that was again, like I said, that was the boiling point for Kelvin Sampson.
It was, and that was the last straw. In the first half, Oklahoma, the Cougar players and coaches were talking to the refs about the illegal screens that OSU was getting away with. So that started it. The frustration with the officiating or lack thereof of calls not being called. And then Javier on the alley-oop, yes, he got undercut. And that was it right there for Coach. And then what happened after that? And then the foul total for what Cowboys had 37 free throws, something like that. Yeah, 37 free throws. Cougs at 14. So it all adds up. Cougs still won by 16, but yes, Coach Sampson, as everyone saw, if you saw the game, he made a point to go to each of the three officials to frustration with them, but he was not going to get fined at $25,000, so he did not go into specifics on the record for the media, for the league to call him later on and fine him because a Big 12 official or Big 12 high up VP was in attendance at tonight's game. I know that for a fact because I talked to him so before the game.
On that note, when it came to the fire that led to him being ejected, let's talk about on the court. What stood out to you, Chris? We kind of touched on all the different things when it came to Jamal Shed having a bounce back performance after for Jamal Shed standards, the low end of the spectrum against Kansas was able to bounce back in a big way at 17 points at halftime, finished with 23 points total. It really seemed like he was on a mission to prove a point and really put that bad performance in the rearview mirror on Saturday.
And he scored at a hard fall early in the game, and he shook it off. So I mean, a lot of Cougs hit the court. For
LJ Cryer had a
looked like he got bent back and stretched out the leg, hamstring, groin, whatever. And then of course Ramon Walker does what he does, just toss his body all over the floor. That's what he's part of his role on the team. But they were much more active on the boards. Jamal was much more effective scoring. He made his shots that he missed at Kansas. It's just one of those days. Cougs shot 50% in this game. And it's not 68.9%. But for the most part, I think all three of us and most of the fans who are watching the LRC, if the Cougs shoot 50% or better, we like their chance of winning ball games. Okay, so they don't do it often, but when they do, they really win big. And tonight was one of those games. Oklahoma State was in the game because of all the free throws they got. And they missed some of them, but they still went to the line and had 37 free throws. But Malik Wilson scored. Deion, I'm sure, was happy about that, even though he missed 2 layups in the first half. But that flip shot he made, that's got to be an SC10, man. That's got to be an SC10 highlight right there. That was something. That flip shot was something else.
Yeah, that was nice. I forgot about that shot. That was his first points. Yeah, and getting to his mid range and his athleticism, be able to shoot over. I don't want to say smaller defender, just a defenders that he can jump over and shoot. So it was good to see him just be aggressive, looking to score. And I think, like I said this earlier, with him and Damian can be consistent in regards to being able to carve out those minutes because of their being consistent. I think it'd be for the betterment of the team. But watching this game with Jamal versus the last game at Kansas, McCullers really bothered Jamal, and I think that's something that he will play against that length and size in the NBA, and having the ability to finish over that size is something is probably going to be in question because watching against Oklahoma State tonight, they had one player, Zion Williams, who guarded him really well. But other than that, they really didn't have anyone that had that length and athleticism that can stay in front of Jamal.
What have you guys commented on some of the comments about the attendance tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of compared a little bit in terms of what was at Adam Fieldhouse and potentially could maybe translate something over to the Fertitta Center. And then obviously, of course, when it comes to this game in particular, 6 p.m. tip-off. Chris, you were there. What was the attendance at Fertitta Center when the ball was tipped up in the air at 6 p.m.?
Oh, no, it was hardly anybody here because traffic over here is a nightmare at 5 o'clock, 5, 6 o'clock. Yeah, to expect, it's not, honestly, especially week, people got to work. I mean, we had folks in media who were late getting here because of traffic. So because most of us have regular jobs and you're doing 8 to 5, and if you got to go 8 to 5 and drive a distance, it's very hard if you get here on time and get here early. So you got to know the environment, the atmosphere, the city, all those kind of things play into it. A 6 o'clock start during the week, it'd be well attended before tip off. It's not realistic.
TI 7791 says, and by the time I got out of work into my car, I wanted to fall asleep. So that's definitely very real. Something we did mention, Chris, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on, even as the game, like Houston, it was close early. It was 13-8 at one point, and then Houston held Oklahoma State scoreless, or at least without a field goal, for almost 8 minutes of the game time in that first half. And basically Houston put it away from there. They were able to play with a cushion. But until Kelvin Sampson got ejected, like, it was kind of just like any other. Really, it reminded me of last season when it came to just a typical conference game, a typical American Athletic Conference game. When it wasn't Memphis, it was just another game. And when Kelvin got tossed, it ignited the Fertitta Center and kind of provided an extra spark. What say you?
The opponent is part of Oklahoma State. They're not having a great season this year. But the tip-off time and during the week, those were bigger factors than, for the Sparks attendance at the start of the game. It got better around halftime. But, yeah, expecting here in H-Town, 6 o'clock during the week for Fertitta Center to be sold out, everybody butts in the seats prior to tip-off, realistic. So that's my piece on that.
That's a conference schedule thing. Raul says he was in attendance, and people showed attendance was great. Just the traffic and game being at 6 p.m. did not help. Is that set by the conference? The tip-off times?
Tip-off times,
or in the TV networks, I'd imagine.
The conference and the networks get together and determine tip-off times.
Apollo Laxias is plugging your interview with Kelvin about Cedric Watts.
It wasn't an interview. It was my question.
Media availability.
It was coach's media availability. But I wanted to ask it because we had talked about it. Fans had, brought it up after Kansas on Saturday. So I wanted to get coach's thoughts on Big Ced and his, playing time for the rest of the season, and the plan for the staff for him. And I think what coach said about comparing him to Chris Harris in the time frame of development says a lot. Chris Harris, first few years was a struggle for him. But that senior year, that end of his junior year, senior year, you could really see the improvement and his confidence getting better. And he was an impact. He made a positive impact for the team, last 3 semesters basically at UH.
It's unfortunate that his last season was cut short for COVID, but it would have been interesting to see what he had been able to do had that NCAA tournament not been canceled that year. But on the topic of this game, Chris, any comments from any of the coaches, any of the players after the game? What stood out to you from the post-game availability following Houston's 79-63 victory over Oklahoma State?
Jamal was asked if there was any difference in Coach Kelvin Sampson and Coach Kelvin Sampson once Coach Kelvin was tossed. And Jamal said, we've all been coached by Coach Kelvin before. That white team, Coach Kellen handles in practice. So we've all coached him before, and coach said it's no different. The culture is still the same. The expectations are still the same. The only thing different is the general is sitting in the back. That's the only difference. I expect you to do the same things, play as hard, no change. And Jamal said it's understood, and that's what we try to do once Coach Samp was ejected. And Dayon, Coach Boynton said that I asked him about Jamal, and he kind of echoes what we and some of the viewers believe, that if Jamal gets a shot in the NBA with right fit, all that kind of stuff, that he could have a long career in the league because of the type of player he is, work ethic, and his just winning mentality. Coach Boynton had some really nice words to say about Jamal as a player, and he said part of his opening remarks was Jamal Shed, All-American, and then he said, first team All-American. Let me be clear.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw Jamal play. I caught a playoff game. He was clearly the best player on the floor, but not one time did he force a shot. And he made the game so much easier through pick and roll and getting his big man layups time and time after getting possession after possession. And that's when I knew then, like, he got it. He got it. And now, fast forward to now that he's develop his offensive game. Now he's a threat, finishing inside the paint with his left, right, and his mid-range jumper. Now he can make threes. I think that just makes him an all-around better player, along with intangible things that you mentioned: winning, leading the team, but being a natural playmaker and knowing how to control the tempo of the game. I mean, I know size and three-point, all those things matter. At some point, you still have to have someone that can control the tempo of the game, or come off the bench, whatever the case may be, whatever the situation is. You need a player that can settle your team down and be the general on the floor, and he can do that.
And the offense kind of bogged down in the second half when Maul was on the bench. Kellen put him back in. Offense clicked just like that because Jamal is that leader. He's that floor leader. He's that general. And the offense, obviously, is much more efficient and effective when he's in charge.
Just want to see a game when him and LJ both have it going at the same time, because they complement each other well. Because of when Jamal has it going and the defense focuses on getting him out of the paint, that should open up for LJ to be able to catch and shoot, or be able to catch and drive, or do whatever the case may be. And it already does that for Emmanuel. I mean, game to game, Emmanuel is going to get you his 12. Now, it may look different on the game because some games he might make 4 threes, or some games he might make 1. He might go to the free throw line. So that's how I know he's a natural scorer. But I want to see a game when Jamal and LJ both have it going at the same time.
And LJ had good looks. Many of them are good looks, but there was one point in the second half. He had his man. He came out the curl, had his man behind him. I think even his defender fell down. And LJ, instead of continuing to the basket, he slowed up and gave his man a chance to get back up, and ended up blocking his shot. And I'm like, LJ, if you had a trip to the bucket, just keep going to the basket and attack. But he didn't. But, just picking things here and there. The Cougs won. Oklahoma State did not score 70, Andy. I said they wouldn't score 70. On Saturday, they would not score 70. All the free throws down the stretch made me kind of wonder, but they did not score 70. Cougs won by 16. The game really wasn't in doubt after a while, but Cougs on the road this Saturday, and that'll be a tough one.
Yeah, only a 16-point win. Honestly, it wasn't as close as the final score seems in this game between Houston and Oklahoma State. Chris, like you just mentioned, what's upcoming for this Houston Cougars team? A trip heading north to a familiar foe, a familiar territory at Fifth Third's Arena against the Cincinnati Bearcats, who have put together a really strong and, quite frankly, an impressive season in their inaugural year in the Big 12. They're going to be entering the matchup 15-7, and this is going to be an opportunity for a quad one win for the Houston Cougars. It's going to be a quad one game for Houston. Obviously, the Bearcats are going to be coming off a week's rest. They last played on this past Saturday when they went into Texas Tech and got a big win against the Red Raiders, 75-72. What do you guys expect to come from that game from the Bearcats? What Wes Miller has been able to establish up in Cincinnati, Ohio?
Jizzle James. I want to get the nickname right. Jizzle James, Edrin James' son. Golly, I'm old. Boy. But it's just a matchup. Coach West has done a good job establishing Cincinnati's program, reestablishing it. And both teams, both programs know each other well, the American face and all. So I think it's going to be competitive, probably ugly at times, defensive struggle. Cougs are going to have to probably score probably 70 points or so to win, maybe 60, 65, whatever, because I think it's going to be a low-scoring, physical. That game might come down to how the refs call it, how tight they call it, because both teams really have to get after it defensively and are physical for both squads. But it's up front. Bearcats have some size, but the Cougs nothing they haven't gone against before. I'm looking forward to it. Game is on, what is it, ESPN2 on Saturday?
The game will be on ESPN2, 3 p.m. tip-off Central Time on ESPN2 on Saturday.
And you're right. It's another quad 1 opportunity for the Cougs. Tonight was quad 3. Last quad 3 for the Cougs for the conference play until post conference championship. Maybe they play Oklahoma State again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hard-fought game. I think it's going to be a back-and-forth game, a close game, a cat fight. Or dog fight. Cat fight for this sake. But I think it's going to be a tough game. I think they know Houston. We know them. It's probably one of the toughest games in regards just to on the floor matchups on the road. Their crowd is going to be, I'm sure, electric. And like Chris just said, they got a lot of talent, good size, and they're going to be ready to play. And Houston's going to get their best shot. But I think Houston will be well prepared, and their defense will probably be the difference. I think, like Chris said, it could be how the referees call it, or I think it could be who makes the most shots, 3-pointers, that is. Which team is able to make shots, because that's the name of the game.
Raoul HD on YouTube says he doesn't expect Houston to steamroll Cincinnati because of how they will fight, but he says he's been watching their games, and one thing that Cincinnati struggles to do, he says they cannot close and finish games. Going back to last season when Houston played at Fifth Third's Arena, it was a competitive, close game for the overwhelming majority of it until Houston was able to kind of pull away late and ride that separation to the finish line. But Bearcats play hard. That's a tough environment. The atmosphere is going to be crazy. And like you guys both just mentioned, familiar foes. There's going to be a lot of physicality and a lot of chippiness in that matchup.
Agreed. It's another road game in the Big 12, and Cincinnati has, except for point guard Jizzle James, really experienced at the other spots, positions on the floor. So that's going to, most of the guys, a lot of the guys for the Bearcats have faced Houston before, so they're won't be new to them. But that point guard matchup, Jamal Shead against Jizzle James, advantage Jamal Shead clearly. But that's not saying Jizzle James does not have talent, doesn't have the experience yet.
That being said, Chris, is there anything else you'd want to add just in terms of takeaways from either post-game interviews, from being there live, anything before we close out?
We didn't get a chance to ask Jamal about really what he injured or what he hurt when he crashed to the floor. He seemed to move around okay, walking in and out of the Jim Nantz media room. So doesn't seem to be too serious. But it was only Jamal, one player, and Coach Sampson came and talked to us tonight. So that's different.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, with that being said, that's pretty much going to do it for today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs. Of course, we're going to like to say thank you to Steve Saxenian for being at the primary sponsor of today's episode of Let's Rage Coogs. Once again, this is Let's Rage Coogs presented by the Saxenian Family. Of course, we also like to say thank you to Mike and Jennifer Pittman with Star Pizza for being the secondary sponsor to today's episode. Star Pizza with multiple locations across the Houston area. Star Pizza is your go-to stop before or after the game. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button on whichever platform, whether it be on the Houston Roundball Review YouTube channel or the Pod Slamma Jamma YouTube channel. Of course, if you're watching us on x.com, make sure that you hit the follow button on the Pod Slamma Jamma account. I think we're very close to hitting 1.4K followers on that platform. So of course we always can ever say thank you for the support. Thank you for tuning in, taking the time out of your Tuesday night to be able to tune in. Chris, I'm gonna toss it over to you. Anything you'd like to plug and any final words?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Dan, for carrying the show while I was listening to Coach Samp. Watch post game, everybody. Go to once it's posted on the athletic channel for Houston's athletic channel. Watch post game because some of y'all may like Coach Sampson's answers, and some of y'all may respond differently. But watch the post-game press conference tonight. If you haven't already seen it, please watch my interview with Tyrell Kirkham, the Big 12's Chief Marketing Officer. Spoke to him this morning, about 25, 30 minutes conversation. He touched on his role to Big 12 and marketing ideas and everything in between. And lo and behold, I didn't know until October, but he used to work for the Detroit Pistons for a few years before coming to the Big 12. He's worked with Commissioner Yormark for going back to their time with the Brooklyn Nets. So really good conversation with him. Follow me on the platforms, Houston Roundball Review on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Spoutable, etc. As always, thank you for taking time to be with us on this edition of Let's Rage Coogs. And we will see you Saturday. And as always, the Houston Roundball Review since 1994. Local name, global perspective.
Unmute myself. Well, I always appreciate the support. All of you all who tuned in on regardless of the YouTube channel, Pod Slamma Jamma or Houston Roundball Review. We appreciate support. Always a pleasure to be alongside Chris and Andy. Good dominating win for Houston, get back on track, and wait to see them go on the road and see if they can take care of business against Cincinnati. Then look forward to their tough stretch of games after that as we get closer and closer to March. And as always, go Cougs, baby.